Hello. Good morning, everybody. So we're going to begin our next panel up here, and it is about public safety in the age of intelligence. So I have a great panel up here of public safety and technology experts, and we're going to talk about public safety in the age of intelligence. So sitting next to me is Gary Brantley, who's the CIO for the City of Atlanta. Next, we have Milton Howard, who's the Senior Director of Product Management for ShotSpotter. And then last, I have Dave Wilkinson, who's the President and CEO of the Atlanta Police Foundation. I do have one caveat. A lot of people hear Police Foundation, and they think about the person that comes to your door to ask for money for the Police Benevolent Society. That is not what the Atlanta Police Foundation is. And when you hear Dave talk, you'll learn a lot more about the sophisticated things the Atlanta Police Foundation does. So we're here today to talk about the aspects of public safety in a smart city and how those particular aspects are good, how they're going, what the challenges are associated with them, and how we as people who are thinking about smart cities can make sure that we're really thinking about how that public safety sector part plays out in emergency response and those different elements. So my first question for the three panelists is, sometimes when people think of smart cities, not you guys, you know better, they think of the deployment of cameras or really very simplistic elements of smart cities. But why don't you explain what the deployment of IoT and smart cities technologies looks like in the public safety sector and what's going on in that area? Just kind of give us a flavor for what's going on. We'll start with Gary.
Yes, so I have a different and unique approach around smart cities. You know, first off, the city has been amazing as it relates to just operationalizing certain things that you wouldn't necessarily, put in a bucket for a smart city initiative or component. And so when you look at it, it is my job to really tie our smart city initiatives to the mayor's priorities. And so, she talked yesterday about compassion. She talked yesterday a little bit about equity, but she wants equity. She wants a world-class infrastructure. And so as we move forward, everything we're doing is tied to that. And so, when we look at the water that services that we provide to residents, when we look at how we police and the data around that and all of those different types of areas, where we can help influence, but also community programming. So, we talked yesterday with Georgia Power a little bit about this last night. We want to develop skills. We want to create a pipeline for talent. And so as we start to move forward, it is very important that those things are in place. So, a smart city can be, I don't think it's one definition for it. I think it's based off of what your city and your residents need at that particular time, and then you put a plan together, a strategic plan, and you focus on getting there.
Milton?
Sure. So at ShotSpotter, I spend a lot of time thinking about how to drive down gun violence in cities. And so our solution enables smart cities to place sensors throughout the city to detect gunfire. And once that gunfire is detected, we evaluate it, figure out whether or not it should be sent to the police department if it is indeed gunfire. And once that alert is sent to the police agency, the police can respond to it. And this all happens within about 60 seconds. And that enables police agencies to actually show up on scene very quickly to gunfire events and potentially catch a perpetrator, but more often than not, engage with the community. And sometimes even they'll find gunshot wound victims there that they can take and scoop up and take them to a local trauma center and potentially save a life. So for us, it's driving down gun violence, but it's also holding police agencies accountable to at-risk and underserved communities so that they actually show up when guns are fired. It's not that they don't want to show up, but they don't necessarily have the tools to show up. There are studies that have been done that show that 80 to 90% of gunfire is goes undetected, or these communities, gunfire is so normalized that the citizens don't actually call when they hear gunfire. And so our solution uncovers that 80 to 90% of gunfire that's never reported, and it essentially acts as an automated 911 call to the local police agency so that they can show up and engage with the community and collect evidence and potentially help victims on scene. So for us, it's really about equity and making sure that these at-risk and underserved communities get the police services that they deserve.
And that plays in very well with what Gary was talking about in the mayor's vision for having a safer Atlanta for all of Atlanta's residents. So, Dave?
Well, thank you, Bentina. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Dave Wilkinson, and tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the former head of the Secret Service here in Georgia, and I only say that to say I'm a longtime law enforcement executive, and now run the Police Foundation. And as Bentina sort of alluded to, the Police Foundation, our overall goal and mission is very simply stated, and that is to create a safer city. But we do that by working closely with the mayor and the chief of police, obviously, and the business leaders of Atlanta to build a public safety strategy, using their business acumen, their subject matter expertise, if you will, and their resources, of course, to build a safer city. And so one of the things that we're so focused on right now is the current strategy for the mayor, and it's called Vision Safe Atlanta. And then obviously it has several components to that, but one of the very important components is uplifting technology, obviously, and enhancing public safety through smart policing. And obviously smart policing resides in a bigger strategy of smart city, but as we define smart policing through the chief and the police department is ultimately creating sort of a paradigm shift in the way we police this city. As you can imagine, police departments across this country typically respond to crimes, typically are more of a reactive posture. In other words, right, the 911 call, the phone rings, the crime takes place, they respond, they do a great job, they investigate the crime. But this paradigm shift we're trying to go through now is obviously through the camera system, through the license plate readers, through the ShotSpotter, and all the different data points that can be aggregated and brought back to our real-time crime center to basically create a position where we can provide information to these officers that not only provides them a great deterrence against crime. One of the things we've done, speaking of cameras, is put blue lights on the cameras, put big signs up saying there are cameras, because first and foremost, like any security measure, we want it to be a deterrence, to deter crime. But then secondly, provide the officers effective response, making sure they have immediate situational awareness, they have immediate information, and in some respects basically gives them information they wouldn't have otherwise. But at the very minimum, aggregate all the data and provide the information that sometimes would take them several days to put together, they could have in several minutes. And so that's really what our goal here is in Atlanta. We've got over 10,000 cameras in the system, license plate readers and all that. We work very closely with Gary and his team, obviously, and the chief to roll this out. I would say right now we're probably at about 60% to 70% of where we want to be down the road here. But it is the future of policing, make no mistake about that. And the focus, I think, in any community should be ensuring that your police agencies are proactive versus simply reactive. And that's really what our goal is.
So Dave, I actually sit on the Police Foundation board, and at yesterday's board meeting, there was some discussion about how the technology was recently used to help solve a crime. As much as you can talk about, can you talk a little bit about that as a practical example?
Yeah, I was telling Bentina about a recent murder investigation. It happened right in front of this building. And a young man was walking down the street about 3 a.m. This happened maybe 3 months ago. He was walking down the street about 3 a.m., was shot and murdered basically right out on the street. They had absolutely no leads. So the homicide detectives show up on the scene, but immediately start canvassing all the scene, of course, and they still had no leads. But obviously, all the data feeds from the video, from the license plate readers, and the ShotSpotter devices started feeding back to these folks. Quickly, they were able to pull up the audio of the shot being fired. It was a single shot. They quickly pulled up the video, seeing the vehicle stopping, two guys getting out, accosting this young man, taking his backpack, unfortunately shooting and killing him there on the scene. They immediately pulled up the license plate information, had these guys' license plates very quickly. Basically, were able to put this information out in a bolo, put it in all the other license plate reader devices, and had these guys in custody within a few hours. And so it's a perfect example of how this can work and how quickly it can work. And this detective, of course, was blown away by the technology, and she made the point several times in the presentation that we would never have been able to put this case together. As typical in a stranger-on-stranger crime, we would have never been able to put this case together had it not been for the technology. And my point to Bentina was, it still took about an hour or two to put this together. And Gary and I talk about this often. That actually could be put together in a few minutes. And that's what our goal ultimately is, and we keep efforting to get there.
Thank you, Dave. So that has a lot to do with the kind of foundation and where a city is and operationalizing the data. And I know, Gary, in a Smart Cities project that Georgia Power has with the city of Atlanta, we're at that stage of figuring out how we operationalize it. Can you talk a little bit about, Gary, the foundational elements a city needs in order to properly utilize this technology?
Well, yeah, of course, you need the technology in, and it needs to be working. So, you know, of course, that's the first and foremost. And so as you start to move through, even one of we have a 12-month roadmap in place. One of the first goals of it is strengthening the core. And so, you know, when you're moving towards a smart city and foundational things, you need to be smart about your planning. And so, you know, you plan effectively when you're smart about how you use data. And so, as we start to move forward and create these different programs and these different areas, you have to have that in place. But secondly, you have to have learners. So when I'm looking for talent and I'm tapping into talent, it's really about individuals that have the grit and the ability to be able to learn. And so we talk about skill sets, we talk about workforce, and sometimes you go out, you look for a specific talent, but you have to have individuals who are with you, who really understand how to learn. And I don't think we focus enough on the learning aspect of being able to evolve, to be able to run these types of programs. So you need that. But the other thing that you need, of course, goes without saying, is funding and a plan that everyone can follow and understand. And so as you move forward, we see smart city PowerPoints, we see the glitz and the glam around it, and I'm really looking forward to moving forward to really operationalize those things that we see that are concepts and theory. And so your plan has to be realistic. It has to reside with residents and citizens. And so as we start to move forward, those are areas that we're really focusing on, and I think that's what makes it up.
Thank you. Dave, do you have anything you wanted to add to the foundational pieces as well?
Well, I mean, as you can imagine, the key to our success, I said this earlier, and that is sort of the subject matter expertise and the business acumen, and working with folks like Bentina and Georgia Power is key. But I think the point I would really want to make is public sector agencies on their own are not just naturally going to strive, in many cases, strive for cutting edge, if you will. And it takes that partnership, it takes that leadership, it takes that subject matter expertise, again, I'll say, from the business community and the partners basically to really make that happen. And so it's all about partnerships. And so one of the things the Police Foundation was sort of coined by the Secretary of Homeland Security a year or two ago as sort of being the ultimate public-private partnership for public safety in this country. And we're real proud of that, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to working with the businesses of Atlanta, coming together ultimately, and using that subject matter expertise. In other words, there's no way Gary could go out and hire some of the resources that companies in Atlanta could provide, in most cases obviously free of charge, basically because they have a vested interest and they want a safe city as well. And so tapping into those resources and that human capital, if you will, and that intellectual capital that we have in the city is key to our success in every way. And I would say that's key to every city's success.
Yes, go ahead, Gary.
Let me add to that. He's absolutely correct. So when you look at some of the things that are going on, particularly in the city of Atlanta, we just commenced the CIO Advisory Board. Dave is on that board, but we have some of the greatest minds in the city from a CIO perspective that have a vested interest in getting things done. And so we're on our third or fourth meeting. It's been it's been extremely eye-opening, and that's just an example of tapping into those resources, but also being efficient in the workforce and utilizing staff augmentation type of concepts and techniques, when you start to move forward to implement some of this technology, this robust technology across the city.
That's right, and implementing that technology has challenges for the users as well as the intended beneficiaries of it. So, Milton, can you talk a little bit about how you see the need for new skills? I think Gary mentioned that a little bit, and staffing, how you kind of see these cutting edge technologies accelerating the things we can do, but how that has implications for us.
Yeah, sure. So in the case of ShotSpotter, it's really important that police agencies adopt best practices around what they do when they actually get on scene of a shooting. And one of those is something called the CIGIC workflow, which is Crime Gun Intelligence Center workflow, which essentially is a process that agencies go through when they're on scene to collect evidence and take that evidence, shell casings, et cetera, and send it to a national correlation center that is run by the ATF, so that they can then link the shooting incident, the current shooting incident, to any past shooting incidents. Because oftentimes you'll find that a lot of shooting incidents are only perpetrated by a few serial shooters. And so to the extent that you can show up on scene and collect that evidence time and time again, you can start putting the pieces together as you end up matching the evidence from one event to another. And so we work a lot with agencies to train them in this best practice. We have ATF members, former ATF members on our team that evangelize this process to our customers so that they can get the most out of showing up. The other thing is that as part of our best practice teachings, if you will, we also talk about adopting the scoop and run best practice. In Camden, New Jersey, the Cooper Health System has done a great job of working with local law enforcement to develop a process whereby when the police show up on scene and there's a gunshot wound victim there, the police will actually take that victim, put them in the patrol car, and take them directly to Cooper's. And on the way, they notify Cooper's that the victim is coming, so that they can get the trauma room ready to receive them. And by doing so, on average, victims are getting to the hospital 4 minutes sooner. And that alone increases the likelihood that they'll actually survive the wound. So those are some of the things that we do to try to change the game.
So of course, fundamentally what's at the heart of all this smart cities technology is data analytics and data collection, right? And there's whether or not it's gunshots or whether or not a particular intersection is more accident prone, whether or not you have drivers who are driving erratically. I mean, there's a lot of information that comes in, but as we gather that information, it's also got some people in the community who are hesitant, who are concerned about it. So, and in particular, some of the very communities that are trying to be served by the technology. So can you guys talk a little bit about how police departments can maintain and improve public trust in this era of kind of digital policing? Dave, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Bentina. I mean, obviously, that's always a concern, and any police department, Atlanta Police Department does a great job with this, and that is community servants working out there with the community, communicating pretty much everything they do strategically or tactically in the community to obviously hope that you're maximizing the security of the community, but you're also minimizing the disruption. You're minimizing the concerns of the community as best you can. So, I mean, I would argue that anything that we're doing through the police departments that is a tactical deployment in the way of technology or anything else, basically, has to be carefully scripted and narrated to the community to make sure there's buy-in. You know, I think in this sort of post 9/11 age, the issue of privacy or Big Brother concerns is really not there as much, and I think that's been shot down on many turns. And I think when you look at cameras and license plate readers and all that, as long as they're in the public space and there's the appropriate level of governance and SOP behind the police department to oversee these programs, they're going to be well received. I think the vast majority, at least in Atlanta, they support this in every way. Matter of fact, they mandate it and demand it. But to Bentina's point, but as new technologies are rolled out, it's very important that we provide this information. And then we basically, I spoke last night to a community group to talk about some of the issues they were dealing with in their community. And they're going to ask the questions, and we darn sure better be ready to give them the answers. Because at the end of the day, if they don't support what we're doing, it's never going to last, and we're never going to be able to be successful.
Thanks, Dave. Milton, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, we invite those questions. In fact, we think it's very important for communities to engage and ask about the questions around privacy. And we take that very seriously. And as such, we've been proactive with the way that we've approached privacy. We recently worked with the policing project at NYU Law to have them audit our practices. And out of that audit came the conclusion that there's very little likelihood that our sensors that are deployed in cities would pick up voice, because that's the primary concern with ShotSpotter, is that voice conversations can be picked up. Well, for one thing, we're usually on top of buildings 30, 40 feet high. And the other thing is that ambient noise, such as voices and road noise and things like that, we're not interested in that noise, because we're interested in boom and pop sounds, things that sound like gunfire. And so for us, we want to actually get rid of that information, not keep it. And the audit showed that we were doing the right thing by limiting how much audio we keep around. We, on a day-to-day basis, keep the last 30 hours of audio in case we need to refer back to it. And then the audio that we actually publish to police agencies, which include the gunfire incident, that's a very small clip, generally about 6 seconds long. And all the other audio we simply discard and don't use it. So we take it very seriously, and we've put internal controls in our company to make sure that only the right people have access to the audio as well. And those are key things that we're doing to instill trust.
Thank you, Milton. So we have time for a few questions. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question of our panel? Yes, sir.
Gun detection technology.
Would you mind standing? Thank you.
Gun detection technology is a little more prevalent in law enforcement space. It's being integrated into body cameras now. I guess I was wondering, what is ShotSpotter doing to make it more affordable for smaller municipalities?
Yeah, sure. So we have a number of customers that are smaller agencies that have adopted ShotSpotter, and we no longer, we used to have a model where the agency was responsible for installing the software and providing the personnel to listen to the gunfire and determine whether or not the gunshots were authentic. And we moved away from that model to a service model so that agencies no longer have to have that skill set and that expense associated with deploying our solution. And so we have a service model. We think it's affordable, and many of our customers are on the small to medium side.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Have you seen any technologies to address other types of violence and crime besides gun shooting, like assaults or robbery? Have you seen some of that?
So the question is, have we seen any other technologies to address other types of crime, like assaults, as opposed to shots, gunshot?
Yeah. I can.
Well, I don't know specifically how to answer that question, but I'll say that, you know, policing is changing, as I mentioned earlier, and ultimately the old ways of a police officer showing up on the scene, pulling out his notepad and saying, "Just the facts, ma'am," as they say, you know, is changing. So now that data and all that information comes in. Ultimately, all the disparate databases within the police department, all the disparate databases within the city, all that information is there. But basically, the ability to aggregate that and provide that to that officer as they're arriving on the scene is really key. So any information. So for example, we talk a lot about in this city about the term repeat offender. And these are these individuals that are committing the most crimes in our city. Folks that have somewhere upwards of 10 felony convictions already and they're still out on the street. Well, there's a lot of information on these guys in the computer systems, right? So it seems like it's a misstep for an individual like that to be in an area of a major crime that, you know, maybe it would fit their MO, if you will, basically, and us not to have that information. So that type of disparate database information comes back together through a program we're working on right now, where it would basically come real time back to the officers in the real-time crime center, so it could be communicated directly to the officers on the street. So my point is, if there is an aggravated assault, which is a big problem in the city of Atlanta right now, there are a certain subset of folks in this city that have committed those assaults, right? And so not to have that information aggregated in real time back to the officers is a mistake, and we're sort of efforting to do that at this time.
Okay. Are there any other? Yes, yes, sir.
I didn't hear you completely, but I do hear you talking about, I think you're saying, how do you take legacy data and bring it into what you would call 21st century type of data analytics programs? You know, good question, and this goes to having, you know, Dave talked a lot about data, and, you know, what he was talking about was predictability, but when you really start to talk about data, the city has a ton of data, right? What's missing is a strategy. Number one, a strategy to get it to a point where it's easy to understand and it's easy to make decisions on, but also the integration, like you're talking about, of old legacy data. And we've been working on that, and we actually have a program in place, you know, where we're looking across the entire city to create not just police, the entire city, to see how each area impacts the other. And so whether that's with potholes in streets, whether that's with policing and security. And so, you know, having a strategy and a plan, and I can't get into the specifics on this stage, but truly having a plan to convert that data over and to make sure that it's in a readable format, it's predictable. Also to make sure, and we talked about this earlier, when you're dealing with data, it needs to be extremely transparent. It's transparent and understandable for the citizen and the resident. And so those are all components that we look at even when we're in the process of converting data over from a legacy system. But it's what we've been dealing with. Of course, government has a lot of legacy systems, and we'll continue to, you know, put strategies in place to move that data over. But it's going well, and, you know, with talent, staff augmentation, partners, you can get those types of things done.
Thank you. So we're out of time, so please help me thank our panelists. Thank you. And of course, this is an extremely important topic. In Atlanta, we like to talk about this being a beloved community. There's a quote by Dr. King that talks about that. And public safety is part and parcel of what builds a beloved community, because it's what gives people the ability to live all around our city and be safe. And there's no other desire anybody has except for to feel safe. So thank you for coming for our panel. We appreciate it.